This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends collection. This interview was originally conducted on September the 1st, 1971. The interviewer is Barbara Richardville. The interviewee is Mrs. Nellie Baldwin, that's capital Baldwin, of Tulsa, Oklahoma. This material was re-recorded on the 28th of April, 1989 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Well, I'm going to start, of course, with the time of horse and buggy days. And I think that if you really remember anything over a period of 50 or 60 or more years, I think you probably were a little frightened at the time that it happened. So we drove a horse and buggy to school. And after school, we usually drove down by Lynch's store and picked up something maybe to take home. And this particular time, we had been into the store and got back into the buggy and started. And the horse, when she started to move, she was stuck about 6 inches in the mud, and she gave a lurch and broke the tug right there. Well, Mr. Lynch was looking at us kids. He knew all us kids very well. And I can see him yet leaning over and rolling up his pants, because men in those days wore high shoes, I suppose, to be protection for the mud, you know. So he walked out, and he fixed our tug for us and gave us a push in the buggy and got us started home and picked his way back into the store. So I often say that this is what I remember before we ever had any pavement or any sidewalks except some boardwalk at that time in Tulsa.
Miss Baldwin, when did you come to Tulsa?
I was born in Tulsa in 1889.
In 1889?
On December the 5th, 1889.
Well, bless your heart.
And I've always lived here. And I'm the only member of my family who has never lived anyplace else. But I've always lived here. I went to school here, graduated from high school in 1909, went to the Warrensburg, Missouri, training school, you know, normal school, came back and taught school here from 1908 till 1918 when I was married. And my child went to school here and graduated from TU, and she lives here too, Betsy Bailiff. And my husband, though, was born and raised in Ohio, and he came to Tulsa in 1912, and of course he died in 1950. But I've always lived in Tulsa, never lived anyplace else. And another thing that I remember very well was when the first oil well, of course, was discovered at Bartlesville. It really caused a great stir in all this area. And so there was soon a well being drilled in Dr. Fred Clinton's property over on Red Fork. And so the time came for the day of shooting. And shooting a well was something that I had never seen. Any of us, my father hadn't either. So he says, we're all going over to see this well shot. And the whole Chamber of Commerce, the commercial club, was all excited. They were all going to be there. So they hitched the buggy up with 2 horses, and my mother and father and us 4 children got in this buggy. Well, of course, there was a road right down to the river, and there was a ford. You could ford in the river. There was no other way to get across. You just drove through the river. So my father drove us over there and got us over there very, very safely. And, of course, so excitement was high. But the well was shot. And when the oil just shot up clear up past the top of the dairy, my father ran. He was so close to it that it ruined a $10 hat that he had, Stetson hat that he had on. It never comes off, that oil. And, well, we all stayed there, and my father couldn't leave. He decided that he just couldn't leave. The men were staying around there talking about other things, you know, and when they were going to drill another well and what they were doing, and I suppose wanting to get interested in it. And so Mother started back home with us 4 kids. And so when she drove out into the middle of the river, Why, the horse decided he wanted to stop and get a drink. There were two horses. And so she let him stop. And when he started, we'd gone into the sand a little bit, and it broke the tug. And there we were, broken down in the middle of the river, just mother and us kids. And my brother could swim, so he got out and was swimming across. And Mr. Fry, who was the Oklahoma senator, was a friend of my father's. And so he came up and he was riding one horse. And so he took us children one at a time out to the shore and brought us and came back. And by that time, my brother was back with whatever we had to have to, and he helped him get the horse and buggy out of the river.
Can you beat that?
That was really exciting.
I'll bet it was.
Because we were scared of quicksand. We kids had heard about quicksand.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you know, I can remember hearing about quicksand in that river since I was just little.
Yes, and we just didn't know but what we were all going right down.
Going right down under the sand. Miss Baldwin, what did your father do?
Well, we really had about a 2,000 acre ranch, and he did a lot of things. Besides running this ranch, we had a lot of men that worked on the place. We had lots of cattle. We had everything in the world that you could think of, chickens, pigs, and had wonderful milk cows, and geese. Mother used to pick geese, and we made each of us feather bed, and we all have pillows from the geese that my mother raised and picked those geese from. It was a great day.
Where would the farm be located, or where would your ranch be located today?
It included Standpipe Hill, you know where what is called Standpipe Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and clear over to Peoria, and from on up to Apache, and back almost around to Cincinnati. And that was before the days that the section lines had been surveyed and cut through. That was just, it was open into prairies. We had lots of hay land that we made in hay. We planted wheat. My father planted oats. We planted lots of corn. And raised lots of corn, lots of hogs, and the cattle were fed corn.
Now, did he actually drive cattle?
No, my father didn't. My father didn't. My father was educated in the Carlisle, Pennsylvania School for Indian Children, and he worked for the federal government when he was old enough to have a job. By that time, it was time to begin to enroll in a lot of the Indians, and he worked in the Quisquee district, as they called it, for the government. And he had other people working on the place that actually did the work, although my mother stayed there. And he brought to be with my mother when he was gone, her brother, who was Clay Payne. And Clay Payne was here from a very early day, too.
Mm-hmm. Now then, when we were standing out here talking, something was mentioned about the train, the Frisco.
Yes.
And the part that your father played with the Frisco.
Well, my father and my uncle were at Claymore before and my uncle's home was always in Claymore. That's where he died, in Claymore, with two brothers, John and George. And after Papa, George Bullitt, B-L-E-T-T-E, and after Mama and Papa were married in November of 1882, they came to Tulsa. But Tulsa, the railroad was only to the Verdigris River. They were building the bridge across the Verdigris River, and it took a long time. But they had located a camp, really it was a camp where the men were living and working at that time to get the railroad here. And when my father opened that store, they sent a wagon and team to Coffeyville, Kansas to get their supplies for this store.
Just imagine, clear to Coffeyville.
Yes, Coffeyville, Kansas.
And the store was here?
Yes.
Or in Claremore now?
You know, it was here then in 1882.
Okay, like a general mercantile?
Well, you would call it that, but I suspect it was very, very limited stock. I know that my mother said they had coffee, and that when the Indians came in, they would ask for cuppy. And she had a hard time finding what they wanted because, but other people that knew were here, they knew, but my mother's never seen an Indian before, and she didn't know anything about Indians, you see. And so they didn't stay in the store long because she didn't like it.
Now then, what did you, can you remember the Haydens, the feed store at First and Elgin?
The Hayden feed store.
Feed or seed?
Oh, I don't remember them. I remember Arthur Allen very well that had the liver stable.
Yes.
And I remember Fire Chief Alder, who was the first fire chief.
Right. Wait just a minute. All right.
I want to give the class of the Tulsa High School of the year 1909 the credit for the first yearbook, which was entitled The Tom Tom. I'm grateful that the name has not been changed. Naming of the book was quite a problem, so the president, who was here in Fountain, appointed a committee. Ruby Henderson, who is now Mrs. O.G. Watt, was the chairman of the committee. After considerable thought, she decided that it should have some idea of the Indian, because most of the students were far from Oklahoma and Indians. But she thought that because it was so recently the Indian Territory, that the Tom Tom should have an Indian name. She decided to ask my father, Geeorge Bullitt, who was Delaware Indian, to help her with some names. So he gave her several names, and when he named Tom Tom and told her the meaning of it, that it was used to call people together, she liked the name and took it back to the class, and the class voted on Tom Tom to become the name of the Tulsa High School's first yearbook, the Tom Tom. And it's still called Tom Tom. I hope they never change it. Wait just a second, let me think. My mother was one of a small group who helped start the First Methodist Church. She was in charter of the First Methodist Church because she wanted us children to go to Sunday school. And you'd be surprised at the talents that people had that had come to this country to make a new life, really. There were, for instance, Mary Watson played the organ for our church, and my mother had her give me organ lessons. And I couldn't pump the pedals on the organ, so my mother had to sit beside me and do the pumping while I learned to play the organ. And I did learn to play the organ. We had, there was a man named George Henry who directed the choir and could direct the choir. And so they had prayer meetings, and they had testimonial meetings where the people went. They had dinners, church dinners. And really, then soon there was a lodge organized for the men to participate in. And then, of course, the commercial club when the town began to get a few more interests. And then shortly the political side developed and the mayor was elected. And then became the question of public schools, and of course then soon came the four other improvements.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about social clubs?
Well, it was a long time before we had any social clubs, and even in high school, the clubs that we had were really sponsored by the teachers, and they were for study, really, just study of poems and things like that.
Now, dear, are we talking about, say, before 1900 or after?
We're talking
statehood?
after statehood, really.
After 1907?
Yes.
Well, of course, that was after the Glen Pool discovery. So,
That's right.
So that was when people began to come in the strongest.
The 1905 is when they really started to come, after that Glen Pool. That was really something.
I'll bet it was. Evidently, from all that I hear, it was something out of this, out of the ordinary. What did you do? Did you have your life then centered around church activity?
Yes, I did.
And not so much social organizations. Now I understand. I've heard about the Ruskin Art Club and the Tuesday Book
that
Club.
came later. It wasn't they were started by 1905, weren't they?
I think so, or 1906, somewhere around in there.
I remember well when they were started, and my mother was invited to join the Tuesday Book Club, and she refused to join. She would have loved to have, but I said, well, Mother, why don't you? She said, well, I don't have a college education. And most of the women that were in the book club did have a college education, but it was before I was even thinking of college. And so, but that's what she told me. She says, because I don't have a college education.
Bless your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You probably knew more than...
Well, she studied, and my mother loved to read novels. I'll never forget the novels that she read. Charlotte Bronte, and they were paperback novels, and she ordered them from Montgomery and Ward, I think.
Can you read?
And she hid them. She would hide them back in the cupboard, and she really didn't want my father to see her reading those books either.
Well,
she did lots of handwork. My mother crocheted a very great deal, and tatted and did handwork. She was a person that just never sat down unless she had some handwork in her hand.
and I'll bet with 4 children, she didn't sit down too often.
Well, we always had a hired girl, and some of the pleasant memories that I have were of the nice girls. They lived right in the house with us, the hired girl did, and just like a member of the family. And I have pleasant memories of some of the nicest hired girls.
I'll bet you do. I'll bet you do.
They were really good to us.
I mustn't keep you longer because I'm concerned about your car.
I need you.
But
one of the things that we did for our vacation was fix the wagon up and put a big grub box, we called it, in the back. It was just kind of like a cabinet, and you could let the top down, and it'd make a table. And my mother could cook the best biscuits you ever ate in what she called a Dutch oven on a fire that you just built out on the ground. And we stayed in a tent, and my father could kill any kind of game, and there was lots of game, and we had the best food because we had lovely fresh fish, that were caught right in the stream.
yeah.
And then we rode the horses out through the different new places, and it was fun going back and forth there in a wagon. That was really quite every year we'd take a camping trip.
Now, how far away?
Well, you could drive all day and not get much farther than 50 miles, with a wagon and
true. Yes, and a wagon load that you'd have to take.
So we'd go up into the Osage, and my father nearly always had cattle. up in the Osage, and there would be a man up there taking care of them. And so we'd go up, and my father would be looking after things that had to be looked after, maybe fixing fence and doing different things while we were there. And the man would be tickled to death to get some good home cooking.
Yeah, gosh, yes.